go to sleep with ourselves, right? No one else. A character like that was this lonely, isolated individual who somehow, and I hope through our storytelling you better understand, was lonely and isolated enough to seek community and some sense of self through the toxicity of Bob Matthews.
Right.
This is a game. Do you not see the shallowness, the hollowness of this game that they're playing with you?
This is a story that happened in the early 1980s.
Yeah.
The book about it, The Silent Brotherhood by Kevin Flynn and Gary Gerhard, was published in 1989. So we're looking back 4 decades, give or take. I'm curious, did you see this as more of a contemporary parable than a story about somewhat recent history? Because what the order stood for is pretty much what the Proud Boys stand for today.
I guess I can start. I found the story because I was looking at contemporary groups, and a producer on the film, Brian Haas, and I had begun looking into the Proud Boys and other domestic terrorist groups that had sort of emerged, let's say 2016, 2017 era, and we're sort of looking for a story that might speak to why that had become prevalent again, and went down a bit of a rabbit hole about Timothy McVeigh and some other sort of domestic terror organizations, and found the story that way. So I think when we approached how to tell the story and how to make the film, we looked at it very much about, let's tell this time period accurately, but we're certainly very aware of the relevance to today.
And Jude, when did you come onto the project, and was it always as both actor and producer?
No, my producing partner, Ben, had built a relationship with Zach, and the script came to us first as a production house with the prospect to produce, and I think Ben, from the get-go, who's here tonight, by the way, Ben always saw the potential in the role, but it was key to me, to find or seek the potential in the piece as a producer and as an opportunity to tell a story rather than to see it as a vehicle for me to be in. What became apparent very quickly was not just the possibilities in this script, this extraordinary true crime story that Zach had so brilliantly folded into a genre piece, but as he, as a collaborator, it became apparent that there was also this incredible potential in the role. But initially, as a producer, I just saw an opportunity to empower and enable a great story to have a light shed on it. And the more we developed it, the more we collaborated, the more I saw in this role. But the role scared me, if I'm honest. Initially, I felt it made me feel incredibly British, and so the challenge was, gosh, this is a very particular type of man. He felt very, very much of his time and very American, and that scared me. And sometimes the challenge and the fear of what a role may demand is the very thing that hooks me. So, but honestly, the real hook was the work we did as a group with Justin. Once we got Justin involved as a director, and he was very much number one always as a director that we knew could unpack this and deliver it both as a genre piece, but also unpack it as a human drama. The more light we shed on Husk and the potential in that role.
I'm going to quote something that the director Danny Boyle told me years back. I was on the set with him. He was filming 127 hours. It's based on the story of Aaron Ralston, who got stuck in a canyon and broke off his own arm. Aaron was on the set, And he would say things to Danny like, I didn't pull my car in that way, I came the other way, or I was wearing a red shirt, not a blue shirt. And Danny finally had enough and said, just because something isn't factual doesn't mean it isn't true, which is a great line about adapting true stories.
Yeah.
So if you applied Danny Boyle's definition to this film, where did you draw the lines of creative license, and what were the facts that you wanted to be true to?
From my perspective as a writer, I think that I looked at almost everything that happened with Bob Matthews in The Order and felt a huge responsibility for that stuff to be incredibly factual. So nearly every event that happens kind of in that perspective of the story is very accurate, and a lot of Bob's dialogue and the big speech that he gives at the National Alliance conference is almost verbatim to a speech that he gave, and that felt sort of important to not try and change or fabricate that stuff. It was also very helpful for me, as that wasn't the funnest stuff to write, so it was nice to have that to fall back on. But then in terms of kind of crafting the story and how the investigation and the characters who investigated the case moved through that and experienced it, and the emotional journey that they went through, I think collectively we took, I wouldn't say a lot of liberty, but we because there were real characters who we amalgamated into those people, but I think that there was an emotional journey that we felt we wanted both the audience and particularly Jude's character to go through. And so I think as long as the facts were true, that the emotions of the characters, I felt like we had a lot of liberty with.
I mean, it's been interesting, hasn't it? Because when your decision to amalgamate the agents and I think free the character of Husk to interpretation was, I thought, very accurate and bold early on. Meant that we could embellish him, and your willingness to be collaborative meant that we could embellish this character with what we needed as storytellers to sort of steer the perspective, the protagonist's perspective and the audience's perspective of the storytelling. And that also allowed us to, broaden the scope and look at Husk as also a potential to mirror Matthews.
Because he's a teacher in his own right.
Well, yeah, but here's a guy, right? So Matthews was a kind of wholesome, community-loving, apparently, charismatic guy who has abundance of family, and here's Husk, who has no family, who is crushed by his sort of obsessions. All of that really helped us as storytellers, and I felt the more I kind of drifted away from the real agents, who, by the way, I lent on a lot. I read all their books and interviewed and so on. But that said, I heard recently that Wayne Maness, who was really the main agent, who saw this and was like, "That's me."
Yeah. Yeah.
Why didn't you just call me back? And we were like, "No, it's not you." What are you talking about? We made him an alcoholic, and he was almost not you. He was like, "No, that's me."
So there was a real agent who had moved to Coeur d'Alene who got involved in the case much in the same sort of procedural way that Jude's character did. Yeah. But he was someone who I think seemingly had come out of this incredible career that he had a little bit unscathed. And I think that felt dramatically a bit uninteresting.
Yeah, and for
scathed is better.
Well, what was interesting to us was that Husk was broken.
Right.
Husk, like us in a way. I loved. This all came from the script, but I love this sense that there's this guy who is carrying the wounds of war. He's carrying the weariness of a successful career, but at what cost? And a little like us, he reminded me of me. 15 years ago, I kind of thought, hey, I'm approaching middle age and the world's in pretty good shape and we've done everything. And suddenly you go, oh no, what's
not exactly
the battle's in front? Like, have I got it in me?
Right.
Have I got anything left to fight the good fight? You know, and I thought that was really key to Husk. And Justin tuned into that, and it reminded him of those wonderful characters that you saw in the films of the 70s and 80s, that Friedkin, Lumet, and early Pollock films with Hackman and Newman, and you know, where they delivered these characters, and your initial concern was, God, are they going to make it through the film?
Right.
You know, they were wounded and battle weary. It's like an old knight, right, who goes to retire and wakes up with a dragon in his back garden.
Bob Matthews is dead, but that doesn't mean his ideas died with him. So you're making a film about a charismatic leader, and you need to show his charisma. How do you render an honest depiction of that person that doesn't at the same time make him out to be a martyr and remind people that they're thinking that war still needs to be fought?
I mean, I think that's a challenge that we talked about every day of producing the movie and developing it, and certainly with Justin and Nick. And you know, I think we relied heavily on Justin, who had sort of mined this kind of stories several times before, with Snowtown, and I always pronounce this wrong, Nitram. But you know, I think we felt like our responsibility was to try and at least dramatize how a character like that can be compelling to a group of marginalized people, and less try and sort of to vilify him, because obviously his ideas are horrendous, and more maybe try to understand why people who have fallen off a ledge in society might be drawn to him. And so I think that we felt like if the character was portrayed just kind of honestly, that was the most responsible thing we can do. And certainly, like, I've read, you know, terrible Twitter reviews of the movie that are like, oh, they finally made a movie about Bob.
Meaning, yay?
Yes, which is scary. But I think ultimately, you know, from a more 1,000-foot view of it, I don't think that's at all what is done. And I think that, you know, hopefully it just sheds an honest light on a lot of the problems in society.
There is this idea that I think can apply to the way some people think, and perhaps to the way some people vote, and it's this. If you have succeeded at something, it is your own accomplishment. You did it yourself. But if you have failed at something, it's not your fault. Someone else is to blame. And that idea to hold others, and notably others who don't look like you, responsible, to blame them for whatever is wrong, seems to lie at the heart of the story. And if you're predisposed to hate others, that scapegoating can quickly turn violent. But it comes up specifically in the interrogation of Torres about blame and blaming others. Can you talk a little bit about that idea of claiming your own success but blaming others for your failure? Because it seems to be a common denominator in some of Bob's followers.
Do you want to talk about that from that scene's perspective? I know that I can just say that idea of community and the desire to forge a future for the families that you either have or that you're trying to build, I think was a huge thematic thing that felt like it ran through the whole piece, and that Justin
He
really
just kept drawing it out.
Yeah, kept drawing it out, and so. But I mean, I think for me, when I was writing it, that is something I kept going back to, was sort of that idea of just how easy it is to find someone to blame when you're not either capable or willing, or the opportunities aren't there for you to find your own way out of things. It's much easier to sort of turn the blame on someone else.
But it's also somewhat to do with the loneliness of the individual. Sorry.
A little closer. The mic.
It's also somewhat to do with the loneliness of the individual. And I think that scene in particular, and that character, that's based on a true, that guy really was a member of
Tom
Silent.
Martinez.
Yeah, Tom Martinez. I mean, this poor guy, Mexican, who had a terrible experience and ended up passing as a white man, pretending to be a white man to join a white supremacist group that would have killed him had they known he was who he was. I mean, what a desperate scenario, an awful, awful story, heartbreaking. And just a lean on stuff that Zach said, that Justin drew on, you know, where Justin is a very noble and gracious storyteller, is that he unpacks humans and the community that empowers them or supports them or explains at least a little bit as to why people act the way they do. We all go to sleep with ourselves, right? No one else. And a character like that, Martinez or Torres in the film, was this lonely, isolated individual who somehow, and I hope through our storytelling you better understand, was lonely and isolated enough to seek community and some sense of self through the toxicity of Bob Matthews. And I think what really happens in that scene and what came out, I don't remember what was scripted, but I remember, you know, that it was an interrogation scene, and at some point I just remember Justin saying, "I think you've got to get in there," and like kind of slapping and going, "Fucking go and sit on him," and it was almost like, it also, I know I squeezed him, but it was almost like a hug. It was almost like a dad going, "What the fuck are you doing, boy?"
A bloody hug,
Like,
but yes.
yeah, but you know, what are you doing? And there's a sort of simplicity to it. And that's, again, it leans on the weariness of Terry, where it's like, I'm so old and tired. Like,
Right.
this is a game. Do you not see the shallowness, the hollowness of this game that they're playing with you? And it's the sort of most direct and singular way of affecting someone and trying to say, you know this is a game. You know this is a sham. We all do. Come on, speak the truth. You know what I mean?
Right.
A lot of that comes from the dynamic, the structure that Zach lent us. It was Justin saying, this is how we physicalize it, but it's also the truth of the scenario. That whole dynamic, that whole element of the story is absolutely accurate. Torres or Martinez was the weak link
Right.
that the FBI found, and he was who they were able to lean on to lead them to Bob. So all of that was absolutely right.
Yeah, Martinez didn't want to kill people. He believed in the cause, but not in murder. And I think Alan Berg's assassination was what kind of changed him. So Alan Berg was number 2 on the order's hit list. I don't know who number 1 was, but the list also included Norman Lear, at the time the top executives of the 3 TV networks, and my favorite, the TV producer Peter Lake. If you don't know the Peter Lake story, CBS asked him to infiltrate a gang of murderous neo-Nazis and Ku Klux Klansmen threatening to overturn the United States government, and he did, and made a documentary about it. But what was it about the media? Yeah.
That's very interesting.
What was it about the media that the order was so obsessed with? Because what they're complaining about now is what people are complaining about now, and George Soros and the liberal media. What was it about the media that got so under their skin?
Well, I mean, I think what's kind of insane in the very small world about it is that that group, they used to call into Alan Berg's show, and they would, you know, I mean, I think something that was brilliant but also incredibly provocative about Alan was that he would purposely kind of provoke these conversations with neo-Nazis and white supremacists, and so Bruce Pierce and David Lane and Bob had all called into the show and had a kind of personal interaction with him, and so I think that what Alan was really effective in doing was really like belittling them in a way that hit on all the insecurities that I think probably people who adhere to those kind of things have. And so, I mean, I don't know exactly what the larger media, like how to speak to that, but I think that what I found very interesting about it is that Alan Berg's assassination was, you know, it seems to me one of the first times that sort of barrier was crossed of like the public voice becoming somebody that could be attacked in their private life, And
Right,
that's
because there
very
were the
dangerous.
peaceful anti-Semites and there were the law-breaking anti-Semites,
Yeah.
and that was the rift.
Well, that was really, Bob's,
That was
the
his
huge chasm that he broke was that idea
But
that
also, it's telling of the period. I mean, we're talking 40 years ago. Berg was a groundbreaker, and you could argue really trailblazed for most outspoken DJs or nowadays podcasters. I mean, he was one of the first. And the effect of the media was obviously very different. We all, those under or over 40 know this, without the phone, if you're on the radio, if you're on TV, it had a massive effect. They wanted to hit something with an effect. Right. And he was local and he was outspoken and they knew they'd make a headline.
Right. I want to ask you about the Turner Diaries. It's a novel by William Luther Pierce.
I love that you call it a novel.
It is a novel. It's a work of imagined. It is a novel.
Yeah, I suppose it is. It's
Written
novel.
under
It's
the pen
novel.
name Andrew MacDonald. Pierce said he was not a neo-Nazi, and more important, not a political plagiarist, because here's an important quote. He said, "I admire many things that Hitler wrote, many of the programs and policies that he instituted in Germany, but we do not blindly copy anyone else's policies or programs." So his hate was all original. But it remains a hugely influential book and is known now as the Bible of white nationalism. Could you talk a little bit? The book is always at the periphery, but it's really not. It's at the heart of what these characters believe. Can you talk about incorporating it into the story? It's a horrifying thing to read, but how did you think about incorporating it and what it meant to the people who believed in it?
Well, it really was kind of my entry point into finding the story of Bob Matthews and finding the book, The Silent Brotherhood, that became like the basis of the movie. I had been on a research trip to Oklahoma City to look at the bombing memorial, and when you go into the bombing memorial, like the first display is the Turner Diaries.
This is at the Murrah Building?
Yes, and because in the Turner Diaries is a kind of blueprint for the bombing of a federal building with a rented, like U-Haul-ish truck, and that's where McVeigh found the idea of how he was going to perpetrate that crime. And he found that book because he had been a fan of Bob Matthews in the Order, and so, I think that it was, from a storytelling perspective, cynically, it was a great device, because the idea that there was a actual blueprint that a group of criminals was following, that a investigator might find and be able to both to say, holy shit, like this is what they've done and this is where they're headed, was very useful, but also incredibly dangerous. The fact that it was something that showed up, at the Capitol in 2000, and when now I'm blanking my years. Yeah, that we were well into development of the film by the time that it happened, and so the fact that it had continued to sort of percolate was, I guess, not surprising by the time that we were making the film, but it was scary.
I wonder if there were things in the book upon which this film is based that you tried to include that just didn't fit. There's this great scene when Matthews is surrounded at the end. The police's K9 squad shows up, and they have a German Shepherd with a great name, Oman von Kaisertor. But the dog was scared off, possibly by the tear gas, and one of the law enforcement officers at the scene, I think it's Manus, remarked, "Never send a German Shepherd after a neo-Nazi." And maybe it's too glib for this story, but were there other parts of the novel that you tried to get in here that didn't fit? I'm sorry, of the account of Matthews that didn't fit? Not a novel.
Because of budget or storytelling?
Both.
What's
The
shocking
helicopters. There were, I
helicopters.
guess, no helicopters. That was the big part.
Yeah, but when we recounted that to agents, they were like, no, that never happened. We were like, yeah.
Which part?
Well, so the actual siege of Whitby Island, when they knew where Matthews was with the last remaining members of the Order, and the special agents who were there saying, let's get him alive, for God's sake, get him alive. And they said in the SWAT team, who are clearly don't want to bring him alive. by all accounts, it was 10 times more insane than that. They were firing in, mortars. They had helicopters circling with AK-47s. I mean, there was no way they wanted anyone to leave that building. And we recounted this to agents of the time, saying, "So, how accurate is this? Do we have to recreate this?" And they were going, "No, well, we would never have done that." Well, there are reports here. No, they're inaccurate. We would never ever have done that. So who's right? What? Who's right? And we felt we went over the top because
Right.
it felt like it was a division being pulled in different directions. But
what you showed is what happened.
well, what we showed was what happened in essence. It goes
Right.
back to what you're saying about never let anything get in the way of telling a story accurately. It felt right that there was a certain momentum by the Bureau to get this issue done with. There was a certain division who had obviously followed the case that wanted it to be done with, but in the right way. They didn't want to martyr this man. They wanted to see it through correctly. And what didn't happen was, we don't believe an agent did go in and face
Right.
Matthews, but we talked about this endlessly. There were versions of our film where no one went in and that it just burnt, and then eventually we just wanted one more moment where we felt
Right.
that Husk and Matthews should face each other, albeit through a mirror, where you sort of see both the symmetry and the conclusion of this unusual relationship, this manhunt, the similarities in the people, but also the inevitability that both of them, through their stubbornness, will
Right.
not back down.
His body was found by a bathtub, though.
Yes, it was.
Yeah.
So we started by talking about how contemporary this story is. I'm going to do something unusual. I'm going to read 3 quotes. One is from Robert Matthews. One is from the manifesto of the 2011 mass murder in Norway, Anders Breivik, and one is by Tucker Carlson.
And you have to work out which is which.
That's exactly what's going to happen. Quote 1, how precisely is diversity our strength? Can you think, for example, of other institutions, such as marriage or military units, in which the less people have in common, the more cohesive they are? Do you get along better with your neighbors, your coworkers, if you can't understand each other or share no common values? Quote 1. Quote 2, if all races and all cultures and all religions were truly equal, then this would be blatantly obvious to the rest of the world, who would be falling over themselves to welcome masses of immigrants from all over the world into their lands to enrich their people with the delights of diversity in the name of equality and multiculturalism. Third, we have become a people dispossessed. All about us, the land is dying. Our cities swarm with dusky hordes. Our heroes and our culture have been insulted and degraded. Were the men of the Alamo only a myth? The result of this invasion is the same, yet our people do not resist. Okay, quote 1, how precisely is diversity our strength? You have Robert Matthews, hands up. You have Tucker Carlson, and you have Andrew Breivik. Okay, Tucker Carlson. 2, if all races and all cultures and all religions were truly equal, Robert Matthews or Anders Breivik? Matthews? Breivik. It's Matthews.
Really?
Last one is Matthews. We have become a people dispossessed.
That's Matthews.
That's Matthews, I'm sorry. Second one was Breivik. We've become a people dispossessed. Sorry about that. There's no scoring.
The Alamo gave it away.
The Alamo gave it away, I know. I should have cut that. Anyway, on that happy note, I want to thank you for making this film. I want to thank you for coming out.
Thank you.
And I hope you keep talking about it. Have a good night.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, man.